The sweeping light of Monte Asho beckons. The warm air of the lower decks beckons as well. We'll get to Ceuta whether I'm watching on deck or not. So I leave the crew to manage without me. They manage without me for 3 round trips a day since time immemorial. I go below to inspect the passengers to see if they're worthy of my company, or whether I'm worthy of theirs. There's a few Americans, a group of Cockneys, an assortment of others. There's the loveliest girl I've ever seen, an Arab girl. I think it's her eyes. A few Spaniards, a short, fat, jovial Arab in white robes and little red fez, proudly showing Africa to all of us. And Africa will be a very friendly place if they're all like him. And there's the boyfriend of the Arab girl. I'm going to Casablanca tonight. Would you like a lift? I look up at the silk scarf and sunglasses. It's my French mate. Of course I would, mon vieux. Bon, as they say in France. I'll collect you on my way down to the car deck. That was rather fortunate. It meant missing Tangier, but the hitchhiker must be as flexible as a chameleon's thumb, especially in a poor country for hitching, and I'd been told that while Spain was bad, which it was, Morocco was impossible, and there I'd be in Casablanca by morning. Splendid. Ceuta. Ceuta is not Morocco, it's Spain. But it's in Africa, so you're getting it in this chapter. Ceuta's duty-free, and therefore cheap petrol. And as there's only one filling station open, it's a long queue. Then there's the customs. The Spanish aren't bad, but the Arabs, dearie me, the Arabs. It takes a while. They don't look too hard at luggage, surprising considering the country's reputation for drug smuggling, but they love forms. Forms must outnumber people by 1,000 to 1. Eventually we're off, in convoy with a French couple going to Casablanca for the first time, who have permission to travel in our experienced wake. Off into the desert. And there's ghostly lightning ahead of us, and later a hailstorm. Is it desert? It doesn't look like desert. It was yellow on the atlases we had at school. It's got trees in it, lots of them, lining the road. And Arabs walk the fields at night and ride donkeys and mopeds. Headlights shine out in the fields as tractors plough all night. It's about 1 a.m. and there's thousands of Arabs wandering round as if it's mid-afternoon. We drive through Tetuan, a fair-sized town. Shops are open, grocers, ironmongers. Just in case you feel the need of a new kettle around 1:15 a.m. I can't believe it. It's another world. And while I'm thinking this, I realise that we've just passed an Arab sitting cross-legged at the edge of the pavement, not looking, probably not thinking. He was there, and that's all you could say of him. A motionless fact, an existence at the roadside. Just outside Tetuan, we're stopped by a police roadblock. 2 narrow strips of metal with large spikes, placed halfway across the road like a medieval level crossing. And in front of it, in the darkness, a policeman waving a torch to signal that he was standing there waving a torch, and would we please not run over him. We were briefly shone at, looked at and asked at, before being waved on. Further on we hailed an Arab of the night and asked the way to Larache. Deuxième à gauche, he said. I was beginning to grasp the scale of Africa. The second on the left was about 50 miles away. On we went, our Peugeot now in the rear, the other car in the van. Actually, the car in the van was a Minimoog. Drowsily on we drove through the long tunnel of our headlights. I contributed conversation to keep our Frenchmen awake as endless lines of trees swept by in the straightness. Où est le désert? C'est une forêt interminable, I pondered. I didn't come to the Sahara to look at trees. Suddenly the car ahead had stopped and we hadn't. Then we did, with a deafening screech. Another roadblock, and a Moroccan gendarme with the smug look that said, "Surprised you there." And on we drowsily went, drowsier and drowsier. Finally stopped for a waking coffee in a small village, El Tleta Jebel El Habib, little white buildings amongst the trees, and a cafe, full of brown blankets with bodies walking round in them, nearly all kids. It's 2 a.m. and they're playing cards. The object seems to be to smash the cards down as hard as possible on the table. Reminds me of when I used to work at Wall's Sausages in Godley. A game of dominoes sounded like a thunderstorm. Our coffees arrived after a while. Meanwhile, we watched the strange Arabs, and no doubt the strange Arabs watched the strange Europeans. We had 2 coffees. They were hot, and it's cold outside. And off again through Larache, Ksar El Kabir, stopping briefly for another coffee at Souk El Durab, on towards Kenitra, and the Arabs are still wandering around. It's worrying. I intended to sleep by the roadside out in the country every night. But if this is what night's like in Africa, they'll keep falling over me. And in more general terms, how safe is Morocco? I had no idea. Entering a large town, fairly well laid out and with excellent street lighting, we see before us a splendid Moorish building, lit up in yellow. It's the Royal Palace. We're in Rabat. It's about 4 a.m. We're almost there, morning's almost here, and the Arabs are still wandering around, mainly on mopeds. I hadn't expected that. My French friend is happy to reach Rabat. It means we're nearly at Casa. We'll book in at an hotel. I'll pay and sleep until about midday. Bonny day, say I. Seems a remarkably bonny day to me. We pass 5 more police roadblocks. They're obviously looking for something, but it's not us. And on we go in the dark, and the Arabs are still all around us, some working, some not. And I'm looking forward to a soft, warm hotel bed and breakfast and a shower and Africa in daylight. We've only seen the night shift. 30 kilometres to Casa. Dark. A cold wind pulls at the trees, and we stop. I think this is it. My mate looks round. Yes, this is definitely it. Is it all right if I leave you here? Oh, suppose so. Not much I can say, really. He's brought me most of the way from Torremolinos. I wasn't in a position to demand a ride in the first place, and I'm not now. So there I was with my sleeping bag, alone in the dark, cold night. He said he might come back. He didn't know. Africa's suddenly more of a worry than it was inside a Peugeot, and from somewhere comes the sound of mopeds. They're coming for me. Perhaps my French mate sells white men into slavery. There are 3 moving lights on the horizon. They're on the main road. Then there's 1 behind me and 2 to my left. Then, on the crest of the hill, 2 yellow beams, and it's the Peugeot. They were still in bed. We'll go into Casa and book that hotel. 5:30 a.m. Casa. And we're in the Hotel Balmoral, a fine old Arab name. I undress, slide under the quilt and sleep the sleep of the English. My French mate thinks he's going to be cold and borrows my jacket and raincoat and sleeping bag and slept the sleep of the French under all of them. Morning. Breakfast in bed. Continental breakfast, but it's not bad, and it's not soup. After breakfast I have a cold shower. A very short one. I was expecting it to be hot. My mate goes out saying, "Don't leave me any money, but leave your address in case I visit England." And with an au revoir, there he was, gone. Gratefully I ate his breakfast and left my address. I went out, changed some money at the first bank I came to, and wandered round the city. Casa, as we habitués know it, is a large market. There's the old Medina, which is a traditional Arab market. There's the new Medina, which is a new traditional Arab market. The new Medina extension, which is an extension to a new traditional Arab market. And there's the rest of the city, which is as much a market as everywhere else. I met my first Arab beggar as I turned the first corner. His fingers dug into my ribs and he said, "Donne-moi l'argent." Not a question. No please. No alms for the love of Allah. Just give me money. I wasn't happy about it, though I had about £25 on me and he obviously hadn't. No. Not something I'd want to say, but I could have said yes hundreds of times to people with less than the £25 I had. I got a map of the city and went to look at the old Medina. I was offered souvenirs at every turn and at ridiculous prices. An Arab wanted my camera. Someone wanted to sell me some French francs. Arabs deal a lot in currency. They know it better than tourists do. I was offered hash. Someone said he had an American friend who had no passport and would I give $250? I walked to the harbour and photographed the boats and the Arabs sleeping. Around midday they just lay down wherever they happen to be, on the pavement, in the shade of walls, anywhere. If they have a jacket that goes over their heads, and there they lie for 2 or 3 hours. I was offered hash, LSD, cocaine. Please buy some, it's in aid of the Seamen's Mission. I passed a large square which was a refuse tip and people were camping on it. I saw a Bedouin encampment on a roundabout in the city centre, another on the station platform. I thought it remarkable that people could just park themselves in public places in the middle of a large city, but I'd been doing pretty much the same so far. They surround their tents with cactus in country areas and wire fences in towns, or festoon fences with tin cans as a warning device. Anyway, enough of Casa. I collect my baggage from the hotel and start walking out of the city. It's rush hour and everyone else is doing the same and getting in my way. Or riding mopeds and getting in my way. Some ride donkeys and get in my way. After what seems like hours, Casa has gone. Everyone's gone. There are only cars and lorries, none of them stopping. 7 p.m. Dusk. My plan is to walk until dark, and then find a spot close to the road to spend the night. This'll do. But now I learn about farmers' dogs. Every farmer's got some, and they're very, very jealous of their territory, and I was on it. And if I'm by the road, Arabs will fall over me. If I'm in a field, the dogs will bite me. I decide on the roadside. My camera goes into the bottom of my sleeping bag as something worth guarding. My duffel bag goes under my head, and I slept soundly in the shadow of an electricity pylon and woke at sunrise. Breakfast was mushroom soup. In daylight, I wasn't too bothered about the dogs, and they weren't bothered about me. And almost immediately, a lift. An estate car going to Casbah Tadler. I left at Berachid, where our paths diverged, and we discovered that my sleeping bag had leaked feathers in the car, and my water container had leaked over the back seat. He wasn't overjoyed. Then a smartly dressed Arab in a smart new Renault stopped, showing commendable intelligence from the first. He put my baggage away in the boot. He was an hotelier who lived in Tarza and had hotels in the Medina in Marrakesh. He spoke sort of English and went to Sussex for his holidays, Lewis usually, and we travelled to Marrakesh. The scenery looked a bit like desert for the first time, and I saw 2 or 3 camels. Marrakesh. He dropped me by the open market and wished me luck. I was offered foreign currency and hash. I had cafe au lait, Arab style, in a glass. I was becoming addicted. There's not much cafe and lots of lait. An Arab youth hailed me. "Hey man, you got any shit to sell?" It's not something I carry for trading purposes. As I turn a corner, a voice says, "Psst," to my left knee. It's an Arab sitting down. What secret transaction does he propose? What evil traffic am I to take part in? He's selling socks. Nylon ones. I wander into Medina, for the tourists must see the Medina and I am a tourist. Every Medina is a wonderful maze of alleyways and Arabs, more bewildering than any maze designed to get lost in. The only maps are on the outside walls. Eventually I learned to navigate by the sun. I must visit the station and photograph the genuine Marrakesh Express. I photograph trains everywhere anyway. It's a long walk. "Turn left at the 7th roundabout," said a friendly gendarme, and on the way I photographed palm trees, Arab ladies with things on their heads, and all things North African. Suburban Marrakesh is all right, clean and white and sunny, and the outskirts were the irrigated oasis which I suppose was the town's beginning. Irrigation surprises me constantly. There's water all over the place, pouring up through concrete holes in the desert, flowing liberally round the landscape and sinking back to earth to begin the cycle again. Arriving at the station, I have an hour to wait for the train, so I prepare a meal of beef and tomato soup. After photographing the train's arrival, it's not crammed with Arabs, poultry and assorted merchandise like the song, just a couple of dozen Arabs and a pair of Americans. I set off for Fez, walking through the pleasant white suburbia. It's 1 p.m. and everyone's hiding in the shade. Donkeys are left under palm trees, their noses in nosebags, and I walk sweatily through long irrigated fields and palm groves. As the afternoon wears on, I'm still walking, and the afternoon procession of mopeds and donkeys passes by. I photographed a typical Arab on a typical donkey as he passed me. He gave me a typical dirty look, which continued for several minutes as he receded into the distance far too slowly. And so I walk on into the evening. From time to time I reach a general store and pause for a Pepsi. Eventually I got a lift on a tractor driven by an unhappy African. If only he had a passport, he could go to Spain or France or England and earn good wages. But in Morocco he can't earn enough to get a passport. In Arab countries they're expensive, and he must drive his tractor each night to earn enough to live in Morocco. And I can't help thinking that if he were selling drugs or trading in currency, he might have enough for a passport. But as a tractor driver and a skilled mechanic, working the land gives him nothing more than existence. And stuck in Africa, he gave me bread and cheese, and I steered while he spread his own cheese. He went several kilometres out of his way to take me a little further. Why is there evil in the world when there are men like him? And why do men like him go unrewarded? Full of these thoughts, I chose a spot equidistant between 4 farms to lie down in a large furrow in what looked like very rich soil. Perhaps I'll grow a bit during the night. Being equidistant from the 4 farms, I was thus at the furthest point from the 4 sets of dogs, which barked intermittently for perhaps an hour at the uninvited something in their area. I was eventually discovered and they all came to bark at me. I moved on a kilometre and got some sleep. Morning came, and with it a Frenchman in a long wheelbase Land Rover. I got in and stroked his dog, which wasn't barking at me. The second lift of the morning was in a large lorry bound for Ouedzem. This took me perhaps 100 kilometres and dropped me where our paths diverged. By now my stomach thought it was dinner time, so I sat on a large rock and made soup while 2 children herded sheep nearby. Across the road a vineyard lay luxuriantly being irrigated. I'm sure there's more water in Morocco than in the UK. It's just that it stays on the ground instead of continually going up in the air and coming down again. A long, hot afternoon boils wastefully by, and no one stops. Until eventually a Peugeot 204 carrying about 39 Arabs, one of whom is very large, pulls up. Give us 5 dirhams and we'll take you to Beni Mellal. Making a mental note not to make a habit of it, I say yes. Perhaps I was supposed to haggle a bit. Anyway, it's too late, I'm in. Why didn't you get the bus to Fez? It's only 25 dirhams. This is about £1.50 for an immense distance. African bus transport's a bargain, but even so I can't afford it. Can't really spare the money for this bit. Beni Mellal is a straggly sort of township built on a hillside, honoured with 2 bus stations and a ring road. Its cafes and shops are mostly closed as it's now Ramadan. My Arab companions point me at the appropriate bus station with a solicitude that says, "Innocent Europeans are safer on the bus." I point myself at the road. Long distance traffic uses the ring road, so I must go there. I walk out to it. And there stands an Arab hitchhiker who accosts me in French. D'où venez-vous? Angleterre. Okay. Where are you going? Fez. Fez. Okay. You are alone? Yes. Yes, okay. You like to travel alone? Yes, I can do what I want that way. Okay. Where in England do you live? Manchester. Manchester. Okay. "What is your work in Manchester?" That was unexpected. They usually just beam at you and say Bobby Charlton. A Frenchman in a Land Rover picks us both up and takes us to a junction just outside Casbah Tadler. The road to Fez avoids the town. My interviewer leaps almost immediately onto the pillion seat of a moped, and I am then confronted by three Arabs. "D'où venez-vous?" Oh, not again. But the conversation's quite short. They're waiting for a bus to Khenifra on the road to Fez. Then the eldest gives the other two their bus fares and announces his intention of coming with me. Oh dear. Hitchhiking's hard enough without the handicap of numbers, and he doesn't like walking. And as time goes by, he doesn't like hitchhiking. But then, neither do I. I've lost count of the times I've thought, never again. Eventually a lorry takes us onward, but drops me after perhaps 20 miles, because I'm European and Europeans carry drugs, and the gendarmerie may stop us, so I leave. He's an ordinary man with a livelihood and probably a family to think of. Another lorry stops, the cab decked out with plastic flowers for Ramadan and nude for the driver. He and his mate mock me and I mock them. As long as we're mocking in the direction of Fez, I don't mind. He stops at his home village, Wayamana, named after a cat being trodden on. It's a lovely little village with buildings of character, an irrigated park. There's enough water for pleasure purposes, and children following me about, pointing and saying, "Tourist." No one likes being called a tourist, especially tourists. The weather was hot, and coming to a main irrigation channel which poured thousands of gallons daily round the fields, I bathed. A convoy of nomads passed. And then the world's worst driver. He lives well out in the Sahara and he's just bought a Citroën Diane and has travelled 600 miles over the weekend. Badly. If he's lucky, he'll get home alive. I was lucky and reached Khenifra alive. Sometimes he drove on the left, sometimes on the right, and sometimes off the road. He took his eyes off the road to tell me how important it was to keep your eyes on the road. He couldn't even keep his car on the road. And after a while there was a horrible crunching noise. Do you know what that is? It's a puncture. He's very happy to show off his knowledge, and he knows where the jack is and how to work it and where the spare tyre is. Clever lad. He couldn't get the wheel off. I motioned him aside and gave his wheel nuts a bit of clog. Gratefully he said he'd take me all the way to Khenifra, and as we wavered on and off the road, he told me why he bought his new car. He drove the last one down a ravine. This is worrying, especially as there's a ravine on our right. We meandered into Khenifra as dusk fell, and a DS-19 arrived, a French couple with a baby in a hurry to Ceuta. On we fly over the mountains and through the cedar forests of night to Azrou and Ivran. Into the headlight beam slinks a large dog. No, it's not. It's some kind of light brown cat, perhaps a mountain lion. I don't really know. There are some about. I read about that in the library in Southampton. By 9 p.m. we're in the new city of Fez. I ask a friendly gendarme, they all are, for a cheap hotel and he shows me one. I find a cafe, have some cafe au lait, then back to my room and cook tomato soup and go tired to bed. 8:30 next morning, bypassing the old town, shining white on the hillside by Oued Cebu. My first lift takes me to Tarza, 110 kilometres towards Algeria. We passed splendid scenery. I'd have liked to photograph it, especially the huge reservoir near Sidi Abdel Dalil. But we didn't stop till Tarza, where I photographed an old steam engine. Not the same, really. Tarza was a village back then. Like many places I went, they're a lot bigger on Google Maps today. I stood thumbing in vain for an eternity. Since Marrakesh, I'd been getting nowhere slowly. 2 Renaults flew past at about 90 miles an hour, one an Alpine, the other an ordinary saloon but with an Andorran registration. Then everything changed. The Andorran Renault stopped. The driver was a New Caledonian by passport. He lived by buying cars in France, driving them to Algiers and selling them. He made about £100 a trip. Not a huge profit considering the time and travel involved, but it was a living that suited him. He loved buying and selling and was good enough at both to live the life he'd chosen. His 2 travelling companions were Moroccan by passport, French by nature, European but born in Casa. Thus my 3 new friends were not quite French. The 2 from Casa were on their way to South Africa with about £5. Upon arrival, they were going to work and live with the black Africans and change the world. I've not noticed the change, but it's a big job. We drove quickly. At Guernsey, one of the Moroccans demanded a stop for coffee. We were stopped twice by the police. Patiently, we explained where and what Andorra was to the friendly and polite gendarmes who didn't seem to realise when we made fun of them. We also made fun of one another, and especially of me. We made fun of everyone, in French, Spanish, English, German, and the odd bit of Italian. Proper little internationals, delinquents we were. At Taurirt, we stopped to stretch our legs in several languages. We passed Uja at tea time and arrived at the customs post. First, the Moroccan bit. You fill in a form with most of your passport details and odd things like your parents' Christian names. This didn't please the New Caledonian, who was illegitimate. His mother was a native of New Caledonia, his father an American airman. He owed his existence to World War II. If you have a car with you, you fill in another form with most of the same details. You then queue, or if you're in Arab, push in, to hand in your passport. Then you stand around for 2 hours before a customs officer strolls out with a handful of passports and starts calling out names. In 2 hours, not one vehicle passed the frontier, going either way. And the customs hall contained about 60 people in transit. The New Caledonian asked when the border would be open, but it was open. It was just that nothing was happening. Then we heard our names being mispronounced. We collected our passports and rolled on to the Algerians' customs post. They never examined our vehicle or our baggage, just our forms.